Hey campers, what's up? It's Yana. Welcome to day 10 of Camp NaNoWriMo July 2020. Let's start with a little update on yesterday first. I did end up watching Jurassic Park a little bit, but I can't confirm if that's what inspired me to write more than 1,000 words for my Camp NaNoWriMo project. That's quite a lot for me. I can't confirm that's what helped, because after that I also watched a documentary on prisons, and then the documentary made me want to rewatch Prison Break, which I also used to be obsessed with some time ago, at least the first season. Then it kind of went bananas, but hey, I was still watching. So I don't know what the conclusion is, because I don't know whether watching something that was related to my story helped me, or whether watching something that was entirely unrelated to my story helped me. So we have no scientific results on that whatsoever, which doesn't matter because I got work done. But watching Prison Break got me thinking about some of my favorite types of characters to both write about and also read and watch, and that's anti-heroes and redeemable villains. Now, those two things for me are quite related, but I do think they are separate things. An anti-hero to me is somebody who probably has a dark past. They may be a little bit reluctant, they may be a bit broody, they may not be the nicest person, but they are ultimately working towards a noble goal, and they are often part of the main character's party. You know, I use that term very loosely. Whereas a redeemable villain is somebody who's obviously a villain. They start out not having a noble goal, they start out with evil intentions, but there is enough goodness in them that they have the potential to be redeemed. And sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not, and there's many different things that you can do with that sort of character. One of the possibly most famous examples of an anti-hero in modern literature is, of course, Severus Snape. And even with him, there are, you know, it's the eternal Snape debate. Is he good? Is he bad? Did he actually get redeemed? Which I find very interesting, because to me that's such a clear-cut anti-hero. Like, that's what that character is. But obviously not everybody agrees with me, which just shows you how blurred those lines are between heroes and villains and everything in between. It's actually very difficult to classify, because people's opinions are always going to differ. One character who I think kind of really straddles the line between anti-hero and redeemable villain is Magneto in X-Men. And so I prefer that character a lot more when he's written as an anti-hero, and I usually get quite annoyed when he's actually cast as the villain, because I don't think it works so well for the character. But he does very often perform the role of the villain, whereas I think that the core of the character and the idea of this character fits a lot better with being an anti-hero. So anytime I see writers go back and forth and have him do things just for the evils, I get really annoyed, because I think that that's very unfair to the character. But I would say that he's kind of walking a very fine line between being a hero, being a villain, being an anti-hero, being a redeemable villain, all of that sort of thing. And then when we talk about redeemable villains, so there's kind of tiers. You've got villains who are straight up villains for the most part, for most of the story, but they will sometimes get a tiny moment which hints at them possibly having the capacity to be redeemed, but they never actually properly get redeemed. I guess you can just call them complex characters. And one example of such a character is Count Olaf in a series of unfortunate events. This character is a completely horrible person and a two-dimensional, no doubt about it, villain for books upon books upon books upon books. And then at the very end of the final book, he gets this tiny moment that suggests that maybe there was more to this character. And when I read that, I was just like, okay, this blows my mind, because you've never hinted at anything like that before, but that makes it very powerful. It's this kind of candle in the darkness effect. If you light a candle in a completely dark room, it's very bright. It will leave an impact. Another type of character like that is, I guess, Darth Vader. He never really gets redeemed, but there is the suggestion that he is not 1000% evil and darkness and absolutely nothing else. Then after that, you have villains that get redeemed, but they get redeemed at the very end of the story with an act of ultimate, a very like big and flamboyant act of ultimate sacrifice. Basically, at one point, they do a 180 and then they die. Which a lot of the time it works, it's fine. I think it's a lot of the time it's more interesting than just having a straight up villain without any depth to them. It can sometimes be annoying. I guess it's more annoying when, if they do it at the very end, that's fine, but if they have some time before that to turn from a villain into an anti-hero, the anti-hero making the ultimate sacrifice, is something that usually kind of irritates me, because it's such a cliche. It's been done so much. You've got, again, you have Snape does that. Boromir, the only truly interesting character in Lord of the Rings. Please don't kill me. I know that most people won't agree with me on that. But Snape, Boromir, Dinobot in Beast Wars. I was a Beast Wars fan, and many, many, many more. Stop killing your anti-heroes. I mean, once in a while is okay, but usually those are the most interesting characters, the ones that you really want to learn more about, and you've become attached to them if you've spent some time with them as an anti-hero as opposed to just being the villain. And you want to find out more, and then they're dead. And that's it. Don't do that. I don't like it. Who knows, maybe you disagree with me. And then another category of these kind of redeemable villains, and the category that I find possibly most interesting, is the survivors. So those are villains that kind of keep going back and forth between being the villain and being maybe not so much a villain for quite a long time, so long that it kind of becomes difficult to kill them, because at this point the audience doesn't want to see them die. Because the more you get to know somebody, the more you start sympathizing with them, and those characters become such an integral part of the experience that if you were to get rid of them, then you would lose quite a lot. And some of those characters just become redeemed over time and go through a phase of being anti-heroes, and some of them just end up being heroes, and then there's a new villain that we need to introduce. That happens quite a lot. A character like that is Regina Mills in Once Upon a Time. That show was insane, but fun sometimes, but insane. So she starts out as a straight up villain, was never meant to be there for that long, was not necessarily meant to be redeemed from what I've kind of heard in interviews and other things about the show. But a combination of the actress and the way that she was playing her, I love Lana Parrilla, she's really cute, and also how fans responded to the character led to that character going on this massive, slightly too prolonged redemption arc, and she ended up as pretty much 1000% a hero. And then possibly the most controversial example, this is a character that a lot of people actually love and sympathize with. Some people love to hate him, some people actually would like to see him redeemed. But if you haven't watched this character and somebody tries to explain to you why they like them, you'd probably think that they're a horrible person. This is by far the most difficult one for me to justify as well. And okay, so it's Theodore Bagwell from Prison Break. Oh boy, it's so hard to explain why this character is so compelling. I think it has a lot to do with Robert Knapper. I think that's another one of those cases where the actor found something in this character that maybe nobody else would have found, and they started playing him a lot more complex than the script necessarily suggested, and it kind of just snowballed from there. But this is a character who on paper is the most, maybe not only on paper, I mean a lot of people will not have any sympathy whatsoever for this character and probably think I'm completely insane and awful, and yeah, please don't hate me. But it's a character that has done the most horrible things in the world, that it's so difficult to explain why you would have any compassion for them or why you would want to see them redeemed. I actually, several years ago, when the 5th season of Prison Break, which they shot years after the show was cancelled, came out, that was kind of an opportunity for me to rewatch the whole series with somebody who had never watched it. And that was somebody that we chatted about that, and I mentioned Bagwell as a character and the fact that I quite enjoy him I enjoy him as a complex villain, but also I can find sympathy for him, and I enjoy the moments where he has little acts of redemption. And that person that I was about to watch the show with was just like, you are freaking this does not make any sense. You're crazy. Like, why? How? And then they watched it and they were like, oh my God, I love this character. So sometimes that happens, and it's amazing when that happens. And those are the kind of characters that I would really love to be good at writing. My stories do usually contain either an anti-hero or a redeemable villain. The novel that I'm writing right now has what I would probably call a redeemed villain rather than a redeemable villain, because I don't think he's broody enough to be an anti-hero. He's definitely not a villain by the time we enter the story. So I don't know what to classify him as, but it's definitely somebody who had a much, much darker past and is now on a completely different path. And then my musical that I'm also writing for Camp NaNoWriMo has a straight up redeemable villain. That's what she is. She's a redeemable villain, and I talked about her briefly. It's the stepmother from the Wild Swans. So I do love those kinds of characters, and I think the reason so many people love them, and I personally love them, is because they give us the opportunity to practice compassion in a safe environment. Because in real life, a lot of the time, if you show compassion or if you sympathize with somebody who is dangerous, that can have very bad consequences, and it's just extremely risky. But in fiction, we can do that without necessarily risking our lives. So it's this sort of what if scenario, this sort of play pretend, helps us figure out our own moral compass, and may also help us in a real situation if we're careful to always keep in mind that fiction is not real life. And the fact that I often love these characters in books and movies, and I can sympathize with them, and I can be objective and think about the reasons that made them who they are and the reasons that made them commit evil acts, doesn't mean that in real life I would put myself in harm's way by befriending a murderer, or that I wouldn't object to an abusive teacher. But the very fact that we're thinking about this, I think, helps us be better members of society, because it shows that if we're reading about such characters and enjoying them, and if we're writing such characters, we understand on a deeper level that human nature is extremely complicated, and really none of us are black or white. We're all various shades of grey, and even the darkest shades of grey have to have some white in there, because otherwise that's not grey, that's just black. And nothing or almost nothing in the world is just black. So yeah, that was a very, very long, I don't even know what that is, a very long speech about my love of deeply grey characters. Let me know how you feel about those morally ambiguous characters, and heroes and villains and anti-heroes and anti-villains. Those are just called heroes. Are you writing any characters like that? I would be super excited. I'd probably want to read your book, because that's a very good way to hook me if you have that sort of character. Do you find it easy to write them? Do you find it very difficult because you don't know where the line is, or if you're making them too good or too evil? And any other thoughts you may have on this topic. I'm going to write later today. I think I've mostly given up on trying to write during the day. I do so much better at night, but it's not a good time for filming. So I think once again this will be a case of I will let you know tomorrow how I did today. Oh my goodness, this is such a long video. That's enough from me. Thanks very much for watching, and I will see you probably tomorrow with another video. Bye!